morning again, and welcome back to this week's special polygraph. We have under discussion the influence socially responsible practices have on consumers' relationship to brands. Here today, we have several social media influencers that are going to help us explaining to you why the affirmation is right or wrong, using a study carried out by themselves to their followers to demonstrate the importance that CSR can have in the relationship between customers and companies. So let's welcome Anita Silva, influencer who is very local on the topic of workers' rights and their working conditions. Joana Castro is coming to talk to us about environmental problems, and José Sancho is going to explain the concept of cause-related marketing. We also have Maria, an expert on fast fashion, which will be the main focus today, and Clara Coelho, an expert on consumer loyalty. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. To introduce the concept that links all the topics we will be talking about, CSR stands for a concept whereby companies integrate social and environmental concerns in their business operations and in their interactions with their stakeholders on a voluntary basis. Now I'd like us to jump into the first topic, which is fashion industry does not represent a problem to the society.
Good morning. So, fortunately, the fashion industry presents many of the main issues of today's world on social responsibility, from work ethics and social justice to environmental concerns. We know that 68% of fast fashion brands don't sustain gender equality policies at production facilities. We also know that the carbon footprint of the fashion industry is over 10% of annual global greenhouse gas emissions, which is larger than all international flights. And 93% of the brands that were surveyed by the Fashion Checker aren't paying garment workers a living wage. With the environmental crisis that the planet faces and general growth in awareness, adopting sustainable practices has become a trending topic and subject of debate over the last years. Consumers are beginning to care more about a brand's values and its impact on planet and people, but it's not certain that this change in consumer awareness is leading to the avoidance of fast fashion choices. Besides the lack of transparency and information about the brand's practices, or throwaway and materialistic culture made customers dissociate from the people and processes that are behind their clothes.
So polygraph evaluation, false. And do you feel that consumers really have this notion? Do they care about this? Let's check. If people try to reduce their environmental and social impact when shopping for clothes.
Our study shows that most of our followers think that fashion is contributing to underpaid labor and to the environmental crisis. The respondents value environmental and social issues. However, only 24.8% of the respondents of that study claim to try to reduce their impact when shopping for clothes, and 60.9% said they did it sometimes. Clients affirm that they do not do it more often because of price. Others justify it as lack of information, and others they stated that just because it was the norm. Only 5% of them affirm that they don't care about it.
Yes, people are getting more involved on this kind of issues. Around 76% thinks that companies must raise awareness towards sustainable practices. The same study shows that when confronted if they felt they could do nothing individually on these issues of the fashion industry, the answers were very different. Some of the answers on the question about why they didn't do more to reduce their impact made it possible to understand that some of the respondents think that companies are the ones who should be held responsible. The truth is that it's hard to create a huge impact if the largest players of the industry, who are not the consumers, do not take the majority of the responsibility. But still, each consumer can make a difference individually.
Polygraph evaluation, fake. But regardless of the importance they give to this issue, do they feel it's important when it translates into practices carried out by companies? Let's check. If people value more company CSR practices related to supporting causes than relating to employees' rights.
When asking if they agree if they had bought a brand mainly because of its corporate social responsibility, the answers were diverse, which shows that people might value more other things while buying clothes. As for avoiding a brand if it is involved in socially irresponsible practices, we conclude that respondents, in average, commit, but not that much. Furthermore, we also asked them which corporate social responsibility dimension was more important to them, and 84.7% chose employees' rights, 69.3% environmental responsibility, and 33.7% supporting and contributing to causes. This was tested in questions later in our study, where it was tried to understand if these concerns or importance translated into actual behaviors.
So our polygraph says it is false. Now, there have been reports that stated that when people know a brand adopts CSR practices, they tend to repurchase more times and recommend it less to friends and family. But is that true?
We asked our respondents to describe how they agreed with repurchasing more times and recommending a brand to family or friends. If firstly, the brand actively supported good causes, secondly, that brand actively support employee rights and work conditions, and thirdly, regarding environmentally friendly behaviors. In general, the respondents show that they would start buying more and recommend the brands that they know are socially responsible. But when it comes to decreasing the consumption of brands they like, even if positive, the results were somehow lower. We were also able to conclude that dimensions that mostly affect the satisfaction and therefore the loyalty of the respondents is employee right and work conditions, followed closely by environmental responsibility. Contributing to and supporting causes is the dimension that influences the behavior the less, which goes according to the answer about the dimension the respondent valued less.
So the answer is true. Even if not everyone, in general, people tend to do this. Now we know that you decided to compare brands, one allegedly good in terms of corporate practices, Adidas, and another allegedly bad, Primark, in order to understand if in face of exposure to positive and negative news, respectively, their behavior changes. So are people more satisfied and have a better image of Adidas than Primark?
So I want to start by stating that I worked at both companies, and during the time, I noticed that it was important for both of them the rating that they had on these practices on some websites, namely Good On You. For those who don't know, Good On You is the world's leading source for fashion brands ratings, and it's a platform that helps customers finding good choices of brands since it rates them in categories from the best to worst according to their corporate social responsibility. So we also chose having these evaluations in mind.
To give some context, on Good On You, Primark has an overall not good enough rating, despite the brand having committed in 2020 to eliminate some chemicals and reduce gas emissions. And having no evidence of that, the supply chain is not certified by labor standards that guarantee the health, living wages, and labor rights of their workers. Regarding Adidas, Good On You says they're doing well on the environment, using some eco-friendly materials and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but did not set a supply chain target. It uses tanneries that are certified gold and silver by the Leather Working Group. In labor, it's a start for the brand. Some part of its supply chain is certified by FLA Workplace Code of Conduct, but there is no evidence that the brand guarantees payment of a living wage to its employees. According to the company itself, it says it is implementing a strategy to achieve a climate neutralization strategy by 2050.
So, the first question, we intend to understand how interested the consumers of the sample are by this brand, asking how regularly they consume it. We concluded that, for Primark, the largest portion of respondents, 46.5%, buy less than once a year. 31.7% a few times a year, and 18.3% say they never buy products of the brand. For Adidas, 19.8% said they never consume the brand, 38.6% said they do it less than once a year, and 37.1% a few times a year, with 2% buying it more than once a month. At this point, we can see a higher consumption than the previous brand. From Primark, we also concluded that they have a tendency on thinking the general consumer doesn't have a very positive image of the brand, but doesn't have a negative either, since the average rate from 1 to 7 was 4.129. For Adidas, consumers consider it a brand with a good image.
Even though in the previous answers consumers mostly said they agree that Primark has not bad image among consumers, consumers in this sample are not satisfied with the brand. And when faced with the actions of their own repeat purchase and recommendations, consumers do not claim to do so. As for Adidas, we can state that individuals in this sample are slightly more satisfied with the brand, however, they don't recommend it as well. We then decided to analyze their opinions on each corporate social responsibility that I mentioned and realized that respondents do not consider Primark conscious in any of them. In Adidas, even though that with the low average responses, we conclude that they consider that the brand R is more conscious in all dimensions, being the most well rated dimension, the supporting of social causes.
Evaluation polygraph, it is true. People buy more and are more satisfied having a better image of Adidas than Primark. But do we know if most people started buying more in Primark after they heard about negative news regarding the brand's socially responsible practices?
So, after being exposed to negative news about Primark, we understood that the majority of people, 64.3%, did not change their behavior. For the 36.6% who answered affirmatively, 64.3% said they bought less, and 36.6% did not change their behavior. We believe that the importance of these values refer to the fact that many individuals at the beginning of the questionnaire about the brand stated that they never consume the brand or do so very rarely. The answer to this question helps us to confirm the conclusions drawn above. When faced with less responsible practices from a brand, consumers decrease their level of satisfaction towards it, what will have an impact on their loyalty towards the brand.
Polygraph evaluation, false. People did not change their behavior and some even started buying less. What about Adidas? For the last question, let's check if it is true that most people started buying more in Adidas after they heard positive news about the brand regarding socially responsible practices, thus becoming more loyal.
For our surprise, it was observed that most individuals, 66.8%, were also unaware of the news or similars associated with the brand. Of the 33.2% who were aware of similar news, 69.6% said that they did not change their behavior, but 16.3% said that they bought more.
Although it's not a huge increase, it will be significant, especially when taking into account the price level of this brand, which is much higher, and the type of product that it sells, that is for specific occasions like sports, and also with higher quality.
Assuming, as studied before, that corporate social responsibility practices affect the brand image and the consumer satisfaction, leading the latter to loyalty. We can draw some conclusions about the question of these two brands. About Primark, we can observe that the respondents showed being much less satisfied with the brand and having a more negative image about it when comparing to Adidas. This translates into a lower intent to buy that brand many times and recommend it to friends and family, not being loyal customers.
Regarding Adidas, we can conclude that, although in general they consider the brand and feel attracted and satisfied by it, regarding social responsibility practices, we can deduce that they still do not know enough about it to recommend it. Furthermore, those who showed knowledge of the company's practices and positive news about it, many of them also said they had started to buy more from the brand, which shows that the social responsibility actions that companies present may have an influence on repurchase and, consequently, on customer loyalty. Despite corporate social responsibilities having an effect in the company's image, there is other factors that do so, and those can be the explanation on why consumers say they won't buy it more often or recommend it.
Well, that concludes today's polygraph questions. To sum up, brands now more than ever need to start including more CSR practices in their management processes and communicate them to customers. I would now like to ask our guests to recap everything that has been said and to highlight the conclusions that should be retained.
With the answers obtained, it was noticeable how much more importance the respondents give to the work conditions and environmental aspects of the corporate social responsibility, in contrast with the causes dimension, which had less priority. They also tend to be more loyal to a brand if it shows the first two dimensions of corporate social responsibility, meaning the employees' rights and work conditions and the environmental responsibility. Even though some of the answers are current and it was understood that the sample is taking steps or claims to do so to improve their fashion behaviors towards a more sustainable life, there are still things that need to be explored in terms of real impact on loyalty. The respondents' cognitive dissonance was shown when comparing the answers given in the first part of the survey about starting to buy more of a brand if they knew that it had social responsible practices, and the question about Adidas, specifically about having started to buy more times after knowing about the good news of Adidas. Even though the great majority of the respondents stated to care about environmental and social issues and understanding that fashion is contributing to that growth, it's not defined that shows much more that consumers show much more loyalty to the brands that are more responsible. However, another important thing to have in mind is the difference between the brands chosen in this study. The results might not have translated into the consumption or loyalty of the consumers towards the brands, not because of the sustainable reasons, but because of the prices, the type use of the clothes, and because their consumption of the brand was already significant.
It was also understood that many of the respondents are still not educated enough about these matters, and this can be explained by the lack of transparency and disclosure on the low responsible practices and procedures implemented by known brands. Besides, we must also take into account that some answers might be the reflection of what respondents wish to do instead of what they actually do. There are also limitations regarding the way brands market their corporate social responsibility practices, from hypocrisy to greenwashing. Consumers now need to do a lot of research to understand the true intent and true actions behind the sustainable marketing of the brands they are considering. So, more than that, we also prepared the QR code with some things you can do. Thank you for letting us sharing our work.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure having you here. That's it for today for the news and the world. This was Polygraph, and I'll see you tomorrow.